Abused by his stepfather, 20 years later the boy returns for revenge. Thomas clenched his hands tightly around his old wool sweater as he looked at his new home. A two-story, run-down house with dark brown roof tiles, sitting at the end of a small road in the village of Fairview. The bitter cold seeped through the thin window panes, but what made him feel even colder was the man standing next to his mother, Bartholomew. "Thomas, come say hello to your stepfather," Helen gently pushed him forward. The 10-year-old boy stood still, feeling a strange shiver when Bartholomew's gaze met his. His black eyes seemed to freeze him in place. He smiled, but it wasn't warm, it wasn't sincere, something was off. "Hello, stepfather." Thomas's voice was so small it almost disappeared into the air. Bartholomew stepped forward, placing his large hand on the boy's shoulder. A slight squeeze, but enough to make him stiffen. "Good boy. We're going to be a happy family, aren't we, Helen?" His mother beamed. "Of course we are. Thomas, you have to try to be friendly with your stepfather." Thomas nodded, but inside, something was screaming in protest. Dinner passed in suffocating silence. His mother talked a lot, about work, about upcoming plans, but Bartholomew wasn't listening. He was watching Thomas, slowly lifting his spoonful of soup to his lips, his deep-set eyes seeming to consume the boy. Thomas lowered his head, focusing on his plate. "What did you do at school today?" Bartholomew suddenly asked. The boy froze, not wanting to answer but knowing that the man was waiting for a reaction. "I studied math." Bartholomew smirked, then suddenly reached out and ran his hand through Thomas's hair. "Your hair is so soft," he murmured. Thomas felt his scalp crawl. His hand moved too slowly, as if he were deliberately feeling every strand. "Father, don't." He pulled away instinctively. Bartholomew chuckled. "What's wrong?" "I'm just showing affection." Helen sighed. "Thomas, don't be rude." "But Mom." "Helen, it's okay," Bartholomew raised a hand, signaling her. "Thomas just isn't used to having a father yet." Thomas wanted to scream that wasn't the reason. But when he looked at his mother, at the trust in her eyes as she gazed at Bartholomew, he knew he couldn't say anything. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. His new room was empty, the curtains swaying in the cold breeze. But what terrified him wasn't the darkness. It was the feeling that someone was watching him. He pulled the blanket over his head, squeezed his eyes shut, telling himself it was just his imagination. But then... click. The door creaked open. His heart pounded. He strained his ears to listen. Slow, heavy footsteps. Someone was standing at his door. The air suddenly felt as heavy as lead, as if every molecule was being squeezed. Thomas held his breath. "Are you asleep?" Bartholomew's voice broke the silence. The boy froze, refusing to answer. "Thomas?" His breath was closer. He could feel the man's warmth just outside the blanket. Thomas clutched the covers tighter, not daring to move. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps receded. The door closed. Thomas opened his eyes, tears rolling down his cheeks onto the pillow. He didn't know what awaited him. But he knew one thing for sure, it wouldn't be anything good. The first signs. The next morning, he went to school with a strange feeling in his stomach. "Thomas, are you okay?" It was Xavier, his best friend. A skinny boy with curly hair but an endless supply of energy. "I'm fine," Thomas lied. Xavier squinted at him. "You look really tired. Did something happen?" Thomas wanted to talk. But how could he? Who would believe him? He just shook his head. But Xavier watched him closely for the rest of the day. That afternoon, Thomas returned home with a heavy heart. He knew Bartholomew would be waiting. And just as he expected, the man was sitting in the living room, as if he had been waiting for him. "Where's Helen?" Thomas asked. Oh, your mother went to the market with Mrs. Angela. She'll be home late. His heart clenched. He didn't want to be alone with him. Come here, Bartholomew beckoned. Thomas didn't move. Thomas. His voice dropped. I said, come here. He had no choice but to step forward. Bartholomew placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and squeezed slightly. Are you afraid of me? Thomas didn't know how to respond. The man smiled. Don't worry, we'll be close soon. His breath hitched. He knew exactly what that meant. Helen had left early that morning, leaving Thomas alone with Bartholomew. He watched his mother's figure disappear down the village road, his heart sinking. He didn't want to be alone with him. We have the whole night to ourselves, Thomas, Bartholomew said, his voice sickly sweet. Thomas didn't reply. He tried to act normal, keeping as much distance as possible. Bartholomew chuckled. What's wrong? Are you scared of your stepfather? Thomas clenched his fists. I'm tired. I want to go to bed early. Bartholomew nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the boy. Then go ahead. But, tonight, you should sleep in my room. Thomas's heart plummeted into an abyss. No. I like sleeping alone. He shook his head, stepping back. Bartholomew stood up, walking toward him slowly. Thomas, I wasn't asking if you liked it. The boy tensed, trying not to cry, but the fear filled every breath. Darkness swallowed the room. Thomas lay stiffly on the bed. His heart pounded so loudly he thought it would echo in the silent night. Bartholomew lay beside him. Too close. His breath brushed against the nape of Thomas's neck. Your mother is lucky to have me taking care of her, he murmured, his voice low and cold. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, refusing to answer. A hand touched him. He jolted, his heart nearly bursting from his chest. Don't, please don't. His voice shook. Bartholomew whispered, so close his breath tickled the boy's ear. Shoo. Don't scream. Do you know what will happen if you make your mother sad? Thomas held his breath, his entire body frozen. Bartholomew tightened his grip on the boy's hand, his breathing heavier. Thomas felt sick, terrified, wanting to run but unable to move. No one was going to save him. No one would believe him. And his mother wasn't here. The nightmare continues. Bartholomew whispered, like a venomous snake. If you open your mouth, I'll tell your mother that you're a liar. Thomas cried silently. But he didn't stop. Bartholomew laughed, his voice hoarse. You don't want your mother to hate you, do you? The boy trembled, unable to do anything but stay silent. After a while, Bartholomew let go of him. He sighed, patting Thomas's back as if he were a lifeless doll. Good boy. Sleep well, son. Thomas clenched his blanket tightly, his tears soaking the pillow. He wanted to disappear from this world. The next morning. Helen returned home with a smile. I bought your favorite bread. Thomas forced himself to swallow his tears, to pretend nothing had happened. But he felt filthy. Bartholomew stepped out of the bedroom, wearing the same fake kind expression. Did you sleep well, Thomas? The boy stood frozen, his throat tightening. Helen smiled, looking at her husband with affection. He cares about you a lot, Thomas. Don't be so distant. Thomas wanted to scream, to tell the truth. But, could he? Would his mother believe him? He bit his lip. He couldn't endure this any longer. He had to say it. I need to talk to you, Mom. Helen looked at him, slightly surprised. All right. What is it? Thomas took a deep breath. Bartholomew smirked, crossing his arms as he watched. Thomas could see it in his eyes. If he spoke. If his mother didn't believe him. If she chose to trust Bartholomew over him, then he would lose everything. But he couldn't stay silent. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. "Do you know that last night, my stepfather—" Bartholomew interrupted, his voice turning low. "Helen, you have to help your son. The boy needs therapy." Helen blinked, confused. "What?" Bartholomew sighed, shaking his head. "I realized something last night. Thomas seems unwell. He has strange fantasies." "No!" Thomas shouted. "I'm not imagining things. You have to believe me, Mom." Helen furrowed her brows, her confusion shifting into anger. "Thomas, what are you saying?" "Mom, he—" Bartholomew stepped forward, his voice heavy with false sorrow. "Helen, you know he still misses his real father. I don't blame him. Thomas, I understand that you don't want another father. But, you can't make up stories like this." Helen inhaled sharply, staring straight at Thomas. "Thomas, are you making this up?" "No." He cried out, tears streaming down his face. Helen studied him for a long moment. Then she slapped him. The world blurred. His ears rang. "Enough. Stop trying to destroy this family," she screamed, her face red with fury. Bartholomew smiled. He had won. Thomas understood something in that moment. He had lost his mother. He had lost everything. Thomas lowered his head, his small hands trembling as they clutched his stinging cheek. He couldn't believe his mother had hit him. "Stop this right now, Thomas. I don't want to hear any more of your lies." Helen yelled, her voice filled with anger and disappointment. The boy shattered completely. Bartholomew sighed, shaking his head as if he were deeply disappointed in him. "Helen, don't be too hard on the boy. Maybe he's just confused." He pretended to be kind, but in his eyes, Thomas saw triumph. "I'm not lying," Thomas whispered, tears falling onto the floor. But Helen didn't hear him. She had been completely manipulated. "Enough, Thomas. You're such a bad child. I've been trying to build a new family for us, but what about you? All you do is resist. All you do is destroy. It's not me. I didn't do anything wrong. I just want you to believe me." Thomas screamed, his chest aching with desperation. Bartholomew watched him with amusement, as if he were enjoying every second of his mother scolding him. Helen shook her head, so angry she couldn't even look at him. "I don't want to hear any more. Go to your room." Thomas couldn't believe it. His mother didn't believe him. No one did. He swallowed his tears, slowly walking up the stairs, feeling as if each step led him deeper into a prison with no escape. The door shut behind him. He collapsed onto his bed, hugging his knees, trying not to sob out loud. His mother had abandoned him. He had no one. Out there, Bartholomew was winning. He felt dirty, afraid, as if he would never be able to touch the light again. But he couldn't give up. He had to find a way to make his mother see the truth. The next day, Thomas tried to make peace with his mother. He was afraid that if he kept resisting, Bartholomew would have more reasons to turn her against him. So he pretended to be normal. But inside, he was constantly searching for a chance to speak to her again. And the opportunity came at noon, when Helen was alone in the kitchen, preparing a meal. Thomas quietly stepped in, his heart racing with anxiety. "Mom," he whispered. Helen turned, her face still tense. "What?" Thomas swallowed, trying not to cry, trying not to shake. "Can you listen to me?" Helen sighed, setting the knife down. "Thomas, if you're going to. I'm not making things up. I swear, Mom. If you don't believe me, you can ask a doctor. They'll check me. They'll tell you the truth." Helen stiffened. She looked at him, confused. Bartholomew suddenly entered, his voice calm but full of menace. "Helen, are you still listening to this nonsense?" Thomas flinched, his heart nearly leaping out of his chest. "Mom, please, just have me checked. If there's nothing wrong, I'll never bring this up again. But if there is, you have to believe me." Helen hesitated. For a moment, he saw doubt in her eyes. Bartholomew gripped her shoulder. "Don't you see? He's trying to drive us apart." Helen bit her lip, her gaze flickering. Thomas held his breath, waiting. But then, she shook her head. "Stop it, Thomas. I don't want to hear any more." The boy froze. "Helen, we need to do something." Bartholomew continued, his voice lowering as if it pained him to say what came next. Thomas tensed, sensing something terrible was coming. "Helen, I think we should send him to a reformatory. To help him learn discipline." Helen's eyes widened. "Bartholomew, what do you mean?" Bartholomew gave Thomas a look of false pity. "The boy isn't well. He's having dangerous delusions, lying about me, defying you. If this continues, he'll destroy himself." Helen faltered. "But, he's just a child. The younger, the easier to correct." Bartholomew patted her shoulder. "Just for a while. So he can learn to think properly." Thomas trembled. He wanted to send him away. So that he could have full control over his mother. And if Thomas was taken away, he would never escape. "Mom. I'm not delusional. I'm not lying. Please don't believe him." But Helen hesitated. She looked at her son, then at her husband. She didn't know who to believe anymore. And that was exactly what Bartholomew wanted. "I'm only thinking of what's best for him," he whispered into her ear, like a poisonous snake. Helen bit her lip. Thomas stopped breathing. "Mom." He pleaded. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Then she said the words that shattered his heart. "I'll think about it." Thomas knew he didn't have much time left. If he didn't do something soon, Bartholomew would destroy him forever. No more hope. His mother didn't believe him. He felt like he was being swallowed by darkness, as if no one could save him anymore. And the worst part? Bartholomew knew it. The following days became hell. Bartholomew no longer needed to hide. He tormented Thomas openly, physically and mentally. "You think your mother will protect you," he sneered, shoving the boy against the wall. "You're just a useless little brat." Thomas didn't fight back. He was too exhausted. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. His mother still loved Bartholomew. She still trusted him. And Thomas was completely alone. The marks of abuse. The signs of abuse started appearing on his body. Bruises on his arms and legs. Scratches on his back from being pushed down. But he didn't tell anyone. Because if his mother didn't believe him, then who would? Xavier started to notice. "That bruise wasn't there yesterday. Did you fall?" Thomas tried to smile, but it was twisted, weak. "Yeah. I fell." Xavier didn't believe him. But he didn't dare ask more. And Thomas didn't dare say more. Because if he spoke, the consequences would be even worse. Bartholomew controlled him with fear. He didn't need to hit him hard. Just a look, just a whisper of a threat, and Thomas would freeze in place. "You want your mother to hate you forever," he hissed in his ear. Thomas clenched his fists, trying not to shake. "No. Then be a good boy." Bartholomew controlled him through isolation. "You don't need friends." He forced Thomas to stay inside, forbidding him from playing with Xavier anymore. "Helen, the boy needs to learn to focus on his family," he said gently to his mother. Helen nodded. You're right. And just like that, Thomas lost his only friend. Xavier tried to talk to him at school. But Thomas stayed away. He didn't want Bartholomew to get angry. Bartholomew controlled him through hunger. If he dared to resist, his dinner would be taken away. If you don't obey, you don't deserve to eat. Helen never knew. Because Bartholomew was always kind when she was around. And Thomas? He started getting used to hunger. Night came again. Thomas became more and more afraid of the night. Because he knew Bartholomew would come into his room again. He would whisper horrible things in his ear. He would stroke his hair, touch him. He would laugh when he saw him tremble. And he couldn't do anything. Because his mother wouldn't believe him. Because if he resisted, Bartholomew would take revenge. And he was only 10 years old. He was just a child. Helen started to notice. She saw how quiet he had become, how little he spoke. She saw how pale and thin he was getting. But she didn't know why. Helen, don't you see? Bartholomew whispered into her ear. The boy is getting worse. Helen nodded, worried. I think we need to be stricter with him, he added. And she believed him. She didn't know that he was the reason for her son's suffering. Losing himself. Thomas was no longer himself. He had lost all hope. He didn't cry anymore. He didn't speak anymore. He just wanted to disappear. But he couldn't live like this forever. He had to escape. No matter where he went. No matter if he died on the streets. It was better than staying here. Running away. Thomas couldn't take another day. He didn't know how many nights he had survived in this hell. He only knew that with each passing day, he was growing weaker. He had lost his mother, his friends, even himself. But he still had one thing left. Determination. He wouldn't let Bartholomew destroy him forever. He was going to leave. No matter what happened. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He listened to the steady breathing of his mother in the next room. He listened to the wind slipping through the windows, the creaking of the house. He listened to his own heartbeat, pounding in his chest. Any moment now, Bartholomew could enter his room. But this time, he wouldn't be there to greet him. A desperate escape. Around 1 a.m. Thomas quietly lifted his blanket, stepping barefoot onto the freezing wooden floor. He didn't take anything with him. No clothes, no food, no money. He only had himself. He opened the window, inch by inch, careful not to make a sound. Outside, the night was pitch black, the streets empty under the dim moonlight. He swallowed hard, his heart hammering. If he got caught, Bartholomew wouldn't forgive him. But he had no choice. For the first time in his life, he leaped into the darkness. The night air was ice cold, cutting through his skin. Thomas ran. He didn't look back. He didn't stop. The narrow alleys of Fairview were silent, except for the distant glow of streetlights. Each step was a beat of hope. Each breath was a silent prayer. Please. Please don't let him catch me. But where could he go? He was only 10 years old. He had no one to turn to. Xavier? No. If he went there, Bartholomew would find him right away. The police? No. Who would believe him? He had only one choice, go as far as possible. He had to keep running. The endless road. Thomas walked through the night. He didn't dare stop, even though his legs ached, even though every breath burned in his chest. He didn't dare look back. If he turned around, he was afraid he'd see Bartholomew right behind him, with that sickening smile. He couldn't let that happen. By the time dawn broke, he had left the village behind. He was hungry. He was tired. He was freezing. But he was alive. He was free. The harsh reality. But this freedom came at a cost. Thomas quickly realized that the world outside was not kind to a homeless child. Strangers passed him without a glance. He walked past a bakery, his stomach twisting with hunger. The scent of freshly baked bread was both sweet and cruel. But he couldn't go inside. He had no money. He had nothing. Begging for help. He tried asking for help. He approached an older woman, his eyes full of desperate hope. "Ma'am, can you help me?" The woman looked him up and down, her expression full of suspicion. "Where did you come from? Why are you wandering the streets?" I got lost." Thomas lied. The woman frowned. "Where are your parents?" Thomas swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. I don't have parents." The woman's face twisted in discomfort, and she took a step back. "Go away. I don't want anything to do with a runaway brat." Thomas froze, a bitter feeling rising in his chest. The world wasn't going to help him. They only saw him as a useless child. He was turned away everywhere he went. When he sat by the roadside, people looked at him like he was a beggar. When he asked for food, they shook their heads and walked past. The world didn't care about him. He was only 10 years old, but he already understood that he was completely alone. A new reality. Thomas knew he couldn't survive like this forever. He had to find some way to stay alive. He couldn't go back. But he also had nowhere to go. There was only one thing he was sure of. Hatred. Hatred for Bartholomew, the man who had destroyed his life. Hatred for his mother, who had turned her back on him. Hatred for the world, where no one cared whether he lived or died. From an innocent child, Thomas had become an abandoned one. And in his eyes, the world had never been crueler. Nowhere to belong. Thomas didn't know how long he had been walking. He was too tired, too hungry, too cold. The sun was high, but he didn't feel any warmth. Each step felt like carrying a weight of lead. Each breath was a battle. He had escaped that house. But now, he was drifting aimlessly in a world that didn't belong to him. That afternoon, he stopped at a small park. Other children were playing, laughing, chasing one another. He stood at a distance, watching. For the first time in his life, he felt like he didn't belong anywhere. He had once been like them. He had once had a home, a loving mother. But now, he was just a ghost. A stranger's attention. A man approached him, his expression wary. "Hey, kid, what are you doing here?" Thomas flinched, stepping back. I'm just resting a little." The man frowned, looking him up and down. "Are you a street kid? No parents?" The question stabbed into Thomas's heart like a knife. He didn't know how to answer. He had parents. But his mother had abandoned him. He had nothing left. He whispered, but the words wouldn't come out. The man sighed and shook his head. "You can't just wander around here. Someone's going to call the police." Thomas froze. The police. They would take him back home. They would send him back to him. He couldn't let that happen. "I'll leave right now," he said quickly, turning and running off. The man watched him go but said nothing more. The harsh streets. Thomas wandered into another part of town. It was noisier, more crowded. But still, no one noticed him. He felt invisible. He felt like the world had no place for him. The cold night. As night fell, he returned to the park. There was nowhere else to go. He curled up on an old bench, pulling his jacket tighter around himself for warmth. The wind was ice cold. His stomach ached with hunger. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the loneliness. For the first time in his life, he realized he was truly alone. No one was looking for him. No one missed him. No one cared whether he was alive or dead. A new threat. But someone was watching him. Thomas felt it. He froze, trying not to move. From the shadows of the park, a figure emerged. It was a man in his 40s, unshaven, his clothes dirty and ragged. His eyes weren't like the others. They didn't hold pity. They didn't hold concern. They held something else. Something dangerous. Thomas felt his breath catch. He had escaped Bartholomew. But now, he was facing another monster. The man stepped closer. "Kid, why are you sleeping out here?" His voice sounded kind. But Thomas didn't trust it. I'm just resting." The man smiled. A smile that made Thomas's skin crawl. "You hungry? I've got some bread here." He held out a half-eaten piece of bread. Thomas's stomach twisted painfully. He was starving. But something about this man terrified him. He didn't dare take it. The man sat down beside him. "Kid, do you want to come with me? I have a warm place to sleep, food to eat. You don't have to stay out here anymore." Thomas clenched his fists. Something was wrong. He could feel the trap being set. He jumped to his feet. I have to go now." The man stood up immediately. "Why the rush?" He took a step forward. Thomas took a step back. His heart pounded wildly. "Run. Run now." Thomas turned and bolted. The man shouted. "Hey, kid. Stop." But he didn't stop. He ran as if his life depended on it. Because it did. He ran through the dark streets, gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew one thing. If he stopped, he would never get another chance. The desperate flight. Thomas kept running. He ran until his legs burned, until his breath came in ragged gasps. He ran until he was sure no one was chasing him anymore. He ran until he was completely exhausted. And then, he collapsed into a narrow alley, panting. He had escaped. But he didn't know how long he could keep running. A child abandoned. For the first time in his life, Thomas truly understood what it meant to be discarded. No one was there to protect him. No one was there to believe him. No one was there to love him. He was just a child abandoned in a vast, uncaring world. And no one cared. 20 years later. A light breeze swept through the small square of Fairview, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread from Mrs. Rosario's bakery. Everything seemed unchanged. But one thing had changed. Thomas had returned. No longer the weak boy from years ago. Now, he was Thomas Rivera, a successful businessman, a powerful, wealthy man. And he hadn't come back for nostalgia. He had returned to end the nightmare that had haunted him for the past 20 years. Bartholomew. Just thinking of that name made his blood boil with hatred. He had destroyed Thomas's childhood. He had turned him into an abandoned, lonely, and broken child. And today, he would pay. Thomas walked through the narrow street, observing everything. The old cafe was still there, though now under new ownership. The church on the high hill still stood tall, its bells echoing across the village. He wondered if anyone would recognize him. But no. To them, he was just a stranger, a sophisticated, strong man. No one remembered the boy who had wandered these streets with pain in his eyes. No one remembered the child whom the world had abandoned. Only he remembered. And today, he would make them remember. The confrontation. What had become of Bartholomew? Thomas had gathered all the information before returning. The man was old now. Weak. Poor. Years of hard labor had worn down his body. But his ego remained unchanged. He still believed he was someone important. A man deserving of respect. He had no idea that his nightmare was about to begin. Thomas stopped in front of a rundown house. So, this is where he lived now. The brick walls were faded, the roof had rotting patches. The windows were filthy, the tattered curtains inside covered in dust. Thomas smirked. Bartholomew had once thought he owned everything. Now, he had nothing. And soon, he would lose even his dignity. The door creaked open. And Bartholomew appeared. He had aged terribly. His hair was completely white, his body thin and frail, his face deeply wrinkled. But his eyes still carried that arrogant gleam. Bartholomew looked Thomas up and down, not recognizing him. Who the hell does he think he is, standing at my door? His voice was gruff, bitter. Thomas didn't answer immediately. He wanted to savor this moment. He wanted Bartholomew to look closely, to feel the fear creeping in. Then, he smiled. It's been a long time, Bartholomew. Bartholomew froze. He frowned, studying Thomas more carefully. Then his eyes widened. He felt something familiar. But he couldn't believe it. No, it can't be. Bartholomew muttered, his voice trembling. Thomas took a step forward. Can't be. You didn't think I'd come back. His smile was devoid of warmth. Bartholomew instinctively stepped back. He felt it. The weak boy he once controlled was gone. In front of him stood a powerful man. And there was nothing he could do. Thomas. Bartholomew whispered the name as if it carried the nightmares of his past. Thomas nodded. That's right. It's me. His eyes locked onto Bartholomew's. If I were you, I'd be very worried right now. Bartholomew swallowed hard. The air felt suffocating. But he tried to regain his composure. Ha! I'm not afraid of some brat. You think coming back here means you can do something? Thomas chuckled coldly. He still didn't understand. But he would soon. You still think you're in control, Bartholomew? Thomas said slowly. Bartholomew didn't reply, but his fists clenched. Do you know what I've done? Bartholomew's eyes widened, now filled with worry. I've spoken to a lot of people in this village, Thomas said with a smirk. Do you remember those who once doubted you? Bartholomew stiffened. Thomas saw the fear in his eyes. Those who once looked at you with suspicion. Those who heard the screams from inside the house. Bartholomew's breathing grew heavy. He knew what was coming. But it was too late. Thomas tilted his head slightly, his voice calm. They will soon know everything. Bartholomew's arrogance disappeared. He began to tremble. He knew what that meant. But he couldn't stop it. For the first time in his life, Bartholomew understood fear. And Thomas wasn't finished. His nightmare was just beginning. The village remembers. Fairview had never been so alive. That afternoon, the news spread like wildfire. Thomas Rivera, the once abandoned child, had returned. And he hadn't come back for nostalgia. He had come back to expose the monster that had haunted him for 20 years. Bartholomew was shaking. He didn't dare step outside. Through his small window, he saw the growing crowd in the village square. Familiar faces. People he had seen every day. People who had once stayed silent while a child suffered. But today, they were here to hear the truth. Thomas stood in the center of the crowd, his gaze sharp and unwavering. He had waited his entire life for this moment. An older man stepped forward. Matthew. The owner of the village tavern. Thomas, is it really you? Thomas nodded. Matthew frowned. Why have you come back? Thomas looked him straight in the eyes. To tell everyone what really happened in that house. A murmur spread through the crowd. People exchanged glances. They had once suspected. They had once heard the quiet cries. They had once seen the empty eyes of young Thomas. But they had done nothing. And now, their silence was about to be shattered. The fall of a tyrant. Bartholomew couldn't hide any longer. The door creaked open, and he stepped out. The crowd immediately turned toward him. Every eye was on him. The air felt heavy. But he tried to keep his composure. He wouldn't let some brat ruin him. He had to take control. "Shut your mouth, Thomas." Bartholomew's voice was deep, trying to sound firm. "Do you really think you can come back here and slander me?" Thomas smiled coldly. "I'm not slandering you. I'm telling the truth." Bartholomew's fists clenched. He still thought he could intimidate. He was wrong. "You have no proof," Bartholomew sneered. "No one will believe you." Thomas calmly pulled out a stack of documents. "You think so?" He held the papers up for the crowd to see: old medical records, hospital examination reports, undeniable evidence of the injuries inflicted upon a 10-year-old child. The entire village fell silent. Then murmurs began to spread, growing louder. Bartholomew turned pale. He hadn't expected Thomas to have this. "And there's more," Thomas said, his voice strong and clear. "Who among you suspected something but never spoke up? Say it. Right now." People started glancing at each other. An elderly woman stepped forward. It was Agnes, Bartholomew's former neighbor. She trembled. I used to hear crying at night." The murmurs in the crowd intensified. Another man, Louis, the owner of the village grocery store, muttered. "I remember once. I saw the boy covered in bruises." Bartholomew took a step back. He could feel the pressure closing in. The very people he had once considered his neighbors were now turning against him. The mother who was too late. Helen appeared. She was much older now. Her hair had turned gray, her face deeply wrinkled with time. But when she saw Thomas, her eyes widened. "Thomas." She stepped toward him, her hands trembling. "It's you." Thomas looked at her coldly. "Yes. It's me." Helen cried. "Where have you been all these years?" "I was looking for you." Thomas clenched his fists. "Looking for me?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Or were you just trying to ease your own guilt?" Helen's voice caught in her throat. She looked down, tears dripping onto the ground. She knew she had been wrong. But there was no longer a chance to make it right. No more escape. Bartholomew tried to speak. But no one was listening anymore. He was surrounded by judging eyes. The very people who had once respected him now looked at him with disgust. Thomas took a step closer. He leaned in, his gaze piercing. "Did you really think you'd get away with it?" Bartholomew shook. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be powerless. The arrest. A police car pulled up. An officer stepped out. "Bartholomew, we have a warrant for your arrest for child abuse and domestic violence." Bartholomew froze. He looked around, as if searching for an escape. But there was none. Two officers stepped forward and snapped the handcuffs onto him. Bartholomew struggled, screaming. "No. You can't do this to me. You're just a worthless brat." Thomas stepped closer, whispering in his ear. "You have no power anymore, Bartholomew." Bartholomew stiffened. His eyes filled with pure terror. And then, he was dragged away, humiliated, as the entire village jeered. Thomas watched. For the first time in 20 years, he felt free. But this wasn't the end. There was still one more thing to do. Justice has no mercy. Bartholomew was pulled away in disgrace. He thrashed, but no one cared. The people who once bowed to him now looked at him with contempt. Some shouted insults. Some spat on the ground as he passed. Bartholomew was no longer feared. He was nothing but a pathetic old man, trembling before everyone. Thomas watched in silence. He didn't need to lay a hand on him. Justice had done its job. The final encounter. Fairview Police Station. Bartholomew was thrown into a holding cell. He collapsed onto a chair, sweat dripping down his face. He couldn't believe this was happening. He had once thought he was untouchable. But now, he knew he had lost. The door creaked open. Thomas stepped inside. No police officers followed. It was just the two of them. Bartholomew lifted his head, eyes filled with hatred. You came here to humiliate me?" Thomas calmly pulled out a chair and sat down. He didn't smile. He wasn't angry. He wasn't gloating. He was just calm. A terrifying calm. "I came to see you one last time." Bartholomew scoffed. "Ha! You think you've won?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. He studied him. He was old. Weak. Broken. And then, he spoke softly. "You still don't get it, Bartholomew. I never had to beat you. You defeated yourself." Bartholomew clenched his fists. "You think, people will hate me forever?" He tried to sound strong. But Thomas saw the fear in his eyes. He had no one left. No power. No respect. Only contempt and disgust. Thomas stood up. He stepped closer, leaning down. "How does fear feel, Bartholomew?" Bartholomew shuddered. "You made a 10-year-old boy afraid for years. But now, you are the one who is afraid." He let his words sink in. "I don't need revenge. Life itself will punish you." Bartholomew couldn't speak. He just sat there, trembling, as Thomas turned and walked away. The mother's plea. Outside, Helen was waiting. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw Thomas step out. "Thomas." He didn't stop. She ran after him, grabbing his arm. "Can you forgive me?" Thomas stopped. He turned to face her, looking straight into her eyes. "You believed him over me." His voice wasn't angry. It was just cold, factual truth. Helen sobbed. I was blind. I let you suffer alone." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't hate her anymore. But he also didn't love her. And he said softly, "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting." Helen choked on her tears. "I know." Thomas nodded slightly. Then he walked away, leaving her standing there, as alone as she had once left him. A future without chains. The next day, Bartholomew was loaded into the police car, taken away. The villagers watched, but no one mourned him. They were done with the monster. He would never return. From a distance, Thomas watched. A soft breeze passed through the village square. He felt lighter than ever before. He was no longer the weak, helpless boy. He was free from the nightmares. The past was over. Thomas left Fairview. He didn't look back. He didn't regret. Only the future lay ahead. And today, the sky was bluer than ever. The moral of Thomas's story. Justice may come late, but it never disappears. Despite suffering injustice, pain, and abandonment, Thomas refused to let the past destroy him. He rose above it, using his strength and success to reclaim justice. Evil will always pay the price. The silence of bystanders may enable cruelty, but the truth cannot stay hidden forever. And most importantly, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go, to move forward.